Welcome to Ethics. I'm Tom, your instructor. And today I'm just going to give a kind of brief introduction into the topic of ethics, right? So I think we're all pretty aware of, what an ethical question is, or an ethical dilemma, or, a question of morals is. Um, but I mean, ethics has to do with the distinction between right and wrong or good and bad, right? When you think someone is acting ethically, we think they're doing the right thing or doing the good thing, right? When someone is acting unethically or immorally, we think they're doing the wrong thing or the bad thing, right? Um, one thing when it comes to ethics that I really want to emphasize at the beginning is that ethical principles are unique in the fact that they have a certain kind of logical structure to them, which is different from other kinds of statements that we make, right? Um, Ethical statements are ought statements. I say, you ought not to steal, right? You ought to give to charity. And ought statements don't function like other facts. And so to demonstrate this, I want to consider a question, right? So I think the principle that you ought not commit murder is probably amongst the most firm ethical beliefs we have, right? It's something that we all tend to share, and we all seem to think is the right ethical principle, right? So, in a certain sense, to say you ought not commit murder, we think that that is true, right? Um, and when we're talking about murder here for the purpose of this discussion, um, we're not talking about killing in times of war. We're not talking about killing in terms of like euthanasia or assisted suicide. We're not talking about self-defense. Those are all, or capital punishment. These kinds of things are more controversial. But just the idea of cold-blooded murder, right? Killing someone, say or you don't know, for like no apparent reason, right? Or a very minimal reason, right? That's what we're talking about. And I think everyone kind of agrees that that is bad, right? It's unethical. Okay. So here's a question. What could convince you to believe the opposite, right? And the opposite is that you ought to commit murder when you want to. That's okay. And it's actually the ethical thing to do. You ought to commit murder when it suits your needs or whatever it is, right? Or you have a bad day or whatnot, right? Um, so the question here is what could possibly convince you to adopt that belief? And so let's consider some examples here. What if law there's laws against murder, and I think every state in the United States. What if they remove that law in Colorado, right? Would that make you think that it's the right thing to do now that the law is gone, that you really should start killing people? Probably not, right? In fact, you might reach out to your local senator or congressman and be like, we want that law back, right? What if, okay, here's another example. What if you read a religious text, right? You're getting into a certain kind of I don't know, sect of Christianity or something, and as you're reading through this text, all of a sudden it says, and actually you ought to commit murder sometimes because it's good for your soul, right? You'd probably be like, I'm not going to read this book anymore. Or you would probably say, I like this book, but this part about murder is needs to be revised, right? You probably reject that claim. Um, what if you had like a certain kind of spiritual experience? What if you were you climbed a 14er or something like this, and you get to the top and you hear a little voice in your head that says you should commit murder, right? You probably wouldn't think that that was you know um, a sign, right? It might be a sign that you need to get evaluated, or you need something's not right, right? You probably reject that as well, right? And also think about someone in a position of authority. What if your parents, or a religious leader that a minister or pastor or someone close to you in your family says, yeah, actually, you should commit murder sometimes. It's good for you, right? You'd probably, again, have them evaluated or, wonder what's going on with them, right? Your knee-jerk reaction is probably going to be to reject it, right? Um, and here's a final example. What if, you read in a biology book or something that humans are naturally hardwired to commit murder. And so, because it's our natural state to kill other living beings, it's okay for us to kill other human beings, right? We probably reject that as well, right? Just because I have a certain natural disposition does not mean that I endorse that disposition, right? And so, so what we start to see here is you start to collect all these facts about the world. You get statements from people who are in positions of authority, or even if you lived in a society where people murdered other people all the time, that would be a bad place to live, right? You probably want to move. You start to collect all these facts to the contrary, and it doesn't seem that they provide evidence that your original belief is false, right? So your original belief is that you ought not commit murder, right? That murder is unethical, and all this other, um, endorsement of the opposite, that actually the idea that you shouldn't commit murder is false, doesn't seem to really, falsify that claim, right? And so, um, if that's true, it also means that those kinds of facts are not going to confirm your ethical belief either, right? The way the world is not going to tell you that you should or should not murder other people, right? It's not going to weigh in on the truth of that ethical principle. And so part of the reason why this is the case is because ethical principles are odd statements, and they're not straightforwardly verifiable, right? They don't function like other things. Consider like a much more benign example here. Your car is painted red, right? That statement is true or false in a very straightforwardly way, right? You just go out and look at your car, and if it's red, then that statement's true. And if your car's not red, then that statement's false, right? It's very easily verifiable. Now, consider the statement that your car ought to be painted red. Now, that can be true if your car is not red, right? It can be true even if your car is red, right? And also, whatever color your car is, it does not falsify that statement, right? The idea is that you really should have a red car, right? And if you do have a red car, then you say, yeah, that's right. That's why I have red cars, because I should, right? The logical structure of odd statements is different. And so when we're dealing with this kind of register of statements, we're talking about these kinds of ethical statements, and we want to evaluate moral principles, we're going to have to approach it in a different way than we approach other questions that we have about the world, right? And ourselves, even, right? There's lots of things that we can't appeal to give us any kind of traction on whether or not we have the right moral principles, or how our moral principles kind of function. So, for example, our questions kind of give us some direction um, in this issue. So we can't appeal to the law, right? Why can't we appeal to laws for our ethical principles? Because laws can be changed. We can reject laws based on ethical viewpoints. Laws can be changed. We can't base our ethics on the way people in our community act, because people can be wrong. Even, large swaths of people can be wrong, right? We can't appeal to biology because we don't always do what we're predisposed to. We don't always follow our biology in different ways, right? We diet, people commit suicide, people do all kinds of things that are against our natures, right? And so even if our biology says that we're predisposed to do something, it's up to us to endorse that predisposition, right? And so, so these are just some examples of the kinds of avenues that are not really open to us if we really want to justify um, ethical principles. So, in this course, what we will be doing is investigating ethical theories. And what ethical theories do is that they use argumentation to try and justify our moral principles, right? Try to articulate what they think are the right moral principles and try to show why we are justified in holding those moral principles, right? So giving some kind of grounding to the idea that you ought not to commit murder, right? And this is the whole really kind of strategy of the course, right? And this is what ethics and philosophy looks like. So, anyways, that should give you something to think about as we move forward. And so that's all I wanted to cover in this video. I'll talk with you all soon.